There is a new DAO in town, and it's made up of some of Web3's most recognizable names. So just a few names that are a part of this new DAO. Alien Worlds, Animoca Brands, Decentraland, The Sandbox, and more have formed the Open Metaverse Alliance for Web3 in hopes that they can overcome interoperability challenges. Their principles are outlined as transparency, inclusiveness, decentralization, and democratization. Now, they intend to join the Metaverse Standards Forum. So you'll remember that the Metaverse Standards Forum was something that I believe was propped up by Meta, and brands like IKEA and Wayfair and Microsoft and Adobe are part of that. So they plan to stand up this DAO and then interact together for this great Metaverse Alliance. Adam, I'm gonna throw it up to you for first thoughts. What do you think?
And I was just looking up the XKCD comic on standards, right? Which is you can basically, I mean, like, everybody wants standards, but the challenge with standards is that everybody also wants whatever they think is the right thing to become the standard. So I think this is actually a good move, because what you're seeing groups of powerful, well-funded companies that are building these types of things starting to band together to create standards as a group rather than creating standards individually and then trying to force that in. This is something we saw back in kind of the earliest days of cryptocurrency, of sort of the tokenized moment, where every project that would come out believed that it would actually become the standard, and as a result wasn't interoperable really with much of anything, because they all had their own standards that they wanted to popularize. So I think that's kind of the way that I look at it on this side. It's a good overall effort, but I think that there's a lot that needs to be done before you actually get to a productive result. I would be shocked if we see standards that are widely adopted for years. I would expect years before seeing any sort of meaningful adoption of those. The space is just too young, and we just don't know what the best practices are to make standards around. Jen?
Yeah, I just wonder, when we look at all of the names that I just said, we have Web3 companies, Web2, some companies that started as brick and mortar, some that have been along for a lot longer than others. Is this a case of too many cooks in the kitchen at such an early phase when we're looking at the metaverse? I don't know, George, what do you think?
Did you guys just see that video of that parrot dancing beside the dog in the Decentraland? Did you guys just see that pop up on our screen?
I missed it.
If that's the metaverse, I'm all in, because that was hilarious. Also, there's a new DAO in town. Jen, that's kind of clever. I like that internal rhyme. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I know. I worked on that for a while. Thank you.
Nice. That was good. But, open metaverse, right? Wasn't that the point from the get-go? That's what we're trying to achieve, right? And I don't really have much to add beyond, I don't want an avatar named G running around that represents me in the metaverse, because there's already enough liability I put CoinDesk through simply by just existing on Twitter. So I'll avoid that rabbit hole at all costs, and I'll toss it up to Sundali for actual content.
Yeah, no, I was a bit confused by their example with avatars. So I'm just going to read out the quote. Your avatar can be more than just virtual representation. It also carries your reputation, as anyone can see on-chain which NFTs you hold, earned, created, or bought, the full history of transactions, as well as hopefully the progression/actions you have contributed throughout time. So I would like to throw it to you guys. Like, what do you make, Adam? What do you make of that? Like, I'm a bit confused. How do you represent your actions and everything you've done?
So one of the big things that characterizes Web3 compared to Web2 and other prior generations of these types of technologies is that identity itself can become, to a certain extent, decentralized. That's because we have these neutral data layers that we call blockchains, and it's also because we have a meaningful and actually adopted, which is kind of the most important part, private key and public key infrastructure. So what that means is that when you log into something like Decentraland or Sandbox, you typically are logging in not with the username and password, but you're actually logging in with your wallet. And then you are building character and you are building identity. You are assigning names around that. You can also look at OpenSea for something that's real similar to this. OpenSea, you can look at any address and people can rename their addresses, and they can add profile pictures to it, and then you can see all of their holdings. So it's much the same thing here, except in the metaverse. Now, that neutral infrastructure provides the possibility and the potential here to create these interoperable systems, because it means that Decentraland, or Sandbox or whatever doesn't own those identities. The person owns that identity. And Sandbox or Decentraland or whatever is just sort of wrapping additional information around it within their own system. And then also looking at the tokens that the person has, potentially sending them tokens, et cetera, which also uses that neutral layer. So there's a ton of potential here. There's no question about that. The issue, I think, remains that the technology is still just really new. We're starting to see very, very, very high fidelity metaverses come out that have very poor ability to actually scale. And then on the other side, you've got projects that aren't great in terms of, graphical fidelity, but they scale really well. That reminds me a lot of blockchain right now, right? You kind of have to pick what's important to you, and then you build from there. And I don't think in the end, when this technology is really popularized and we start to see it really make a big difference in our world, that will be true. I think you'll be able to have your cake and eat it too. But there's still so much to go before that again, it's a step in the right direction. And it's good to see these efforts, being so large so early on. But I think there's still a lot of work to do before we get anywhere meaningful. Back to you.
Thank you for that. And then when you say, sorry, go on, Jen.
I'm just going to go super quick. I was going to say, Adam, I completely agree with you. And it will be interesting to see how these open metaverses play with the closed metaverses. There are going to be closed metaverses. I think that's no secret. A lot of the metaverses that are run by brands that people interact with are going to be closed. And it's mirroring what we're seeing now with blockchain and crypto, right? And so it'll be interesting to see how these two, the open metaverses and the closed metaverses, play together. But that's my ramble on what's going to happen.
Jen,
and here we go. We can see. George, I was wondering what you're laughing at, and this is amazing.
It wasn't you. It was
definitely a life
sure.
I wanna be a part of.
This might make me like the metaverse. So.
Suddenly, I'll give you the last word.
No, this is great. I love that little clip. I wish that was me in there. But yeah, I just wanted to point out also that, the technology is at a very young stage, as Adam pointed out, but so are DAOs. I'm still not convinced DAO governance is where it could be or needs to be. We've had some questionable governance scenarios. It's vulnerable to manipulation. One entity can have more power depending on their stake. So it will be interesting to see how this evolves. I'm hoping at this level, with these kinds of organizations involved, where it stands to represent the metaverse kind of at large, that we can see DAO working as we all hoped it could, I think, maybe. So that's an optimistic note.
So we're going to move on to our next story in just a second, but a real quick note about DAOs. DAOs, in my opinion, right now are like someone invented the concept of a corporation, and then people are like, do corporations for everything, right? Like a corporation or a DAO, they're just structures, right? They're structures that allow you to coordinate stuff, but ultimately it's the what you're coordinating, not the mechanism by which you're coordinating it, that determines the success of the thing, that determines how it works, et cetera. So again, they're exciting right now and buzzwordy, and they will become important with time. But again, as you said, the technology is so young, it's interesting to see them paired together in this way, and perhaps not a good thing.